Hello, Math 8. Mrs. Davidson here again. I just wanted to welcome you back. Today we are going to learn all things in slope-intercept form. So get that piece of paper and a writing utensil. There are so many notes. You need to have that thinking brain engaged, but you also need to get comfy. Here we go. Today we're going to classify and translate the meaning of all of the components in y equals mx plus b. And in order to do that, you need to believe in your ability to try. There is a lot of components and a lot of definitions that are compacted in this tiny little equation of y equals mx plus b. So before we begin actually delving into that, I want you to answer these 4 questions. What do you think linear means? Use those clues in the language to figure that out. What do you think a function is? Why do you think that we learned how to do everything graph first? We're going to be doing this all the way to winter break. Why do you think we take so much time in this area? Pause the video, write down what you think for all 4 of those questions. Now that you've written all of that down, I want you to write down slope-intercept form and then write down pretty big y equals mx plus b. My little drawings that I have there means that we're going to fill those up with all the notes for all of what those letters mean. And there's a lot of meanings there. So pause the video, make sure that you write that down and set it up for some notes. Recall that the last video was all about graphing points. And remember that a point is written as an x, y coordinate. We already know what these things mean. We know that x is the coordinate point. We know that it tells us if we go left or right. What we may not know is that x is also called the independent variable, an independent variable. And the way I like to remember that is that our ex friend, our ex partner, our ex is somebody that we want to be independent of. If we didn't want to be independent of that ex, they would be our current, but they're not. They're our ex. So an x is an independent variable. Our x is also the input value. That makes sense. Independent variable, input value. Okay, so we also know what y stands for. We've done that before. That's not new to us. So if the x is the x coordinate, you're right in thinking that the y is the right y coordinate. And if the x tells us left or right, then we know that the y tells us up or down. It also tells us that it's the dependent variable. And I like to think of a little kid just learning how to be independent. They're still very dependent as people. They ask the question, why? Why, Mommy? Why? Why do I have to put a coat on? Why do I have to eat broccoli? Why? And our answer is why is because of mx plus b. So y is absolutely dependent on the variable. That x value, that x coordinate, we get to pick. And whatever value we pick for that independent variable, we do the stuff to it, and then there's an output. The output in y. Okay, so remember, mathematicians name things for what they are because we're not very imaginative. So this is called a slope-intercept form. And the only 2 letters we have left is the m and the b. So the m has to be the first word in our form. That's right, m is slope. That slope tells us the slope of a mountain, the slope of a line, the slope of the road you're traveling on. That slope tells us how much you rise versus how much you run. And that makes sense. You're going to have to rise up out of bed before you can go on a run. So it makes sense that the rise has to come first. And if we're talking about rising, like if the sun is rising, or if you are rising out of bed, you are going up or down. You are rising up or you're rising down. And if you go on a run, I'd much rather run where it's super flat. And then I'm just going left or right. So if we know that the rise is telling us up and down, that means that the rise is the changing of what the y values do. And if the run is telling us left and right, that means it's telling us what the x values do, the difference in the x values. You notice that I wrote the change of y values as a triangle. That triangle is a Greek letter named delta. And delta means difference. In math, if I ask you for the difference, I'm telling you subtraction. So we actually know how to find a slope because we are subtracting some y's and we're subtracting some x's. We'll get more into that later. So we know that a slope is a rise over run. We know that it's the change of y's over the change of x's. But what that tells us is the steepness. How steep is this slope? How shallow is this slope? If that number that is m, that number that's attached to the x, if that number is greater than 1, it's said to be a steep slope. If that number is between 0 and 1, meaning if it's a fraction, that slope is said to be shallow. The last thing that slope tells us is the direction. The direction is the sign of that value of m. So if the direction is positive, or if that m value is positive, it's telling me that that slope goes up, or it points to the right-hand side. So we know that a positive value for m tells us that I have a slope that points to the right or that goes uphill. That would mean that if I have a negative value for m, so if I had like a -3, that negative would tell me that it goes downhill or it points to the left-hand side. Whew, that was a lot. M stands for a lot of different things. We have one letter left, so if m was our slope, what do we think our intercept is? What letter would that be? I just asked it in my question. What letter would that be? Our B is our intercept. That B is not just the intercept, it's the y-intercept. And that y-intercept says that it crosses through the y-axis at that place. That is where we begin. That value of B tells us where we begin. That beginning point as an actual coordinate point, our x would be 0 because we're not moving left or right at all. And our y value would be whatever that b number is. That b number tells us if we start on the above the x-axis on the y-axis for the intercept, or below. It would be on the upper part of the y-intercept if it's positive, and it would be on the lower part of the y-axis if it's negative. That was a lot of notes. Are you ready to practice? I know I am. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pause the video periodically, and I'm going to have you write down an equation and then answer the questions that I ask. So go ahead and write down y equals mx plus b. What does the m stand for? Give me 3 different names that we can say instead of m? What does the x mean? What does the y do? Is the y independent or dependent? How do you know? What does the b mean? Your next equation is y equals negative 3x plus 7. Try answering these questions without using any of your notes. What is the m value? If you said negative 3, you're correct. What does that negative 3 mean? It tells us that our slope is pretty steep because the number itself is 3 and that is greater than 1. It is a negative number, so that tells us that it points down or that it points to the left-hand side of the number line. Where is the starting point? That beginning point is the b value. That b value is positive 7. That tells us that our line crosses the y-axis at positive 7. Good job. Well, that's it for this video. If you need more practice, I encourage you to make up a bunch of flashcards and ask yourself all the questions on all the parts of any slope intercept form equation you come up with. Enjoy your time off. We'll see you next time. Bye.